Welcome to the conversation, Kristan. How are we doing?
Oh, I'm great. I'm better now. It's been a long minute since I've gotten to talk to you.
I'm really, really grateful you're on the podcast. And for those listening in, Kristan is my guide. She's a coach and a therapist. She's a mum. She's a Wonder Woman. And she is probably the best practitioner of the tools out there in the world. I honestly have so much respect and admiration and gratitude for you, Kristan. Thank you so much for being here on the session. It's like I'm so excited for our conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me, and right back at you about all those things. In our work and the tools work, it's all about application, right? Doesn't matter. I mean, what we're thinking in our head matters, but practicing, this is a dimension, the material world, or earth school, as Elizabeth Gilbert calls it, is a dimension of application. You can know a lot, but if you're not applying that information, that insight about yourself to your life, you're not changing, you're not growing. And the reason I say that is that you are one of the people who does that like the most wholeheartedly and assiduously. You are such a devoted, committed practitioner of the work. And I'm inspired by you. I haven't gotten to talk to you. That's why I'm so excited. But
yeah, do you know what? It's funny because like every morning, so you said something to me once. I was like, I can't remember what I was struggling with. And you said to me about the idea of just every single morning when I'm running into the sun, this idea of the sun filling me back up, ready to take on the day. And it's like every single morning, that's a reset for me. I live in Dubai, obviously. So I get out in the morning, the sun's coming up, and I just feel this refreshed energy to take on the day. And I think, just want to take a beat to just really introduce what we're going to be talking about. So this is actually like 3 or 4 years, maybe more, 3 years ago. I found a book called The Tools through my work with another coach, and I reached out to the authors, and I got Kristan's mentor, which is Barry Michels. Barry did a session with us, and he actually said, you should get in touch with Kristan. And the work of the tools, and this is what I understand, Kristan, you might want to kind of develop on this as well, is that when I started to work out in between stimulus and response, there's a choice. There's a moment though where we get to make a decision about how we act. And I first learned this like when I read Viktor Frankl's work, and I started to read, watch so much self-development. It's like, oh, we actually get to choose about how we respond to the world. But I think that what so many people have is the problem that in that moment where they get to make a choice, they're in the wrong state. And what I think is, if I'm correct, is the tools help you reclaim that micro moment in the middle between stimulus and response. Is that kind of what?
I love that statement. Absolutely. It's an intervention, a pattern interruption, or another way of, my way of thinking of it is a pause. Like you're actually installing a pause between stimulus and response. And then the tools help you, they give you a new dance move. And you don't even really have to understand why you're using the tool. That's what's so cool about the tools and efficient and elegant about them, is that you don't have to. It's like in our work, taking a new action begets insight and change and growth. It's not like traditional therapy, where you're trying to analyze all of your behavior and all the patterns and why and where it came from. That's valuable. It's really good information, but it also really works to just notice, oh, I hit my head against the same wall over and over. This mean guy at work, causes me so much strife. Let me try a new dance move. And you use a tool, and you insert the tool, and you watch outcomes change. And then that hardwires your brain differently. It gives you a new experience that, 99 times out of 100 feels a heck of a lot better than the way you normally do it. And so that's kind of, what a tool does.
Yeah, I can even attest to that, because I remember, I taught in body transformation. The supermarket was literally a battlefield for your body transformation. Like you're walking up and down the aisles, you're going, that's where you're making your selection, often mindlessly. And I remember when I learned the tool, which is the Black Sun, and I just it was what Barry said when he talked about this tool. It was like, you're dipping into the external world to fill myself up. And I was like, that like changed my life. There was so many of my impulses where I would just be dipping into the outside world to fill a hole that was insatiable. And that carried on into so much of my addictive behaviors. And when I really, really understood this, I think I honestly now I've got so little times where I act on impulse and reaction. I'm like, I've become so much less reactive to my environment. And that changed my life. It was huge, and it helped so many people. And here's the other thing. One of the things that I first interacted with was shadow work. And what I found first and foremost, when I first discovered shadow work, it's very conceptual. It was very much like this thing, and I didn't have, because you hear so many people say, "Oh, yeah, you need to do some shadow work," or when you go through a period of your life where you're struggling, you need to work on your shadow. What I liked about what you do so well is it became a tool in itself for self-actualization. Can you talk to that for a second? Because I think so many people talk about this nebulous concept that they don't really use, or it's not a part of a strategy or a tool. And you do that so beautifully.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to give credit where credit is due. I was trained as a psychotherapist and went to a Jungian institution. The shadow is Carl Jung, is the father of shadow work, a Swiss psychiatrist. But really, my mentors, Phil Stutz and Barry Michels, innovated a way to work with the shadow, which has more, like you said, is less abstract, more tangible, more real time, and gives you a way to apply a relationship with a part of yourself, right? The shadow is the part of you. Every single human being has a shadow. It is a universal human coping strategy. Everybody has a shadow, no matter how good or bad your childhood. That's a point that I really emphasize quite a bit, because we all experience varying degrees of trauma. But being human is traumatic because, let's just say it up front, we don't know why we're here. We don't know what comes next, and we don't know when we're going to die or how. So that's humbling, and that's scary, and that feels out of control. And we can pretend that's not the design of the game, the game setup, but it is. And so we walk around, and so we all develop a shadow because just being human is insecure. And anyway, the shadow is the part of us. We encounter things. Again, it doesn't matter how much trauma or pain or loss, every human experiences some degree of loss or not feeling that they're perfectly mirrored. Let me cut to the punchline. Whatever is unmanageable as we develop, as we're growing up, an experience we can't make sense of, pain that we can't deal with, a part of ourselves that our environment is saying, don't be too gay, don't be too ambitious, don't be too vulnerable. We all get messages. Whatever is intolerable or unmanageable to us, we push into the unconscious, and an alter ego self forms, a shadow, to carry that which we just can't make sense of in early childhood. So everybody has a shadow. And again, it's the carrier. Jung called it the dark side of the personality. The problem with not knowing your shadow, and Barry and I make a very bold statement when we teach our shadow workshop, which is that most psychological problems in the modern era come from forgetting that we share our consciousness with our shadow, with this alter ego self. And what do I mean by that? It won't remain a silent passenger for life. It ends up fading, creating a lens on how we perceive ourselves in reality. It also takes us over. It's incredibly, it creates friction in our lives if we don't find and admit our shadows. So back to the question, our work gives you a way to find your shadow and then bring it alive every day and relate to it. Here's the kicker: as a real being with its own consciousness, its own point of view, its own intelligence. It is as real, even though it's invisible and it lives in your unconscious, it is as real as your ego identity. It's just not visible. And when you start to give it the dignity of its own identity, point of view, and voice, you give it a voice. And our work teaches you how to bring your shadow alive and relate to it as a being not just the part you want to avoid. I mean, we avoid it because it carries material, again, that's confusing or painful. The ego would rather not deal with it, but not dealing with it has a cost. And so there's an elegance, people can come with so many different kinds of symptoms. And the answer most of the time is in finding the shadow related to the challenge or symptom or problem that they're encountering. And it's so elegant. It works, every time. We work with what isn't, what is presenting as a problem in the here and now. And it takes us back to some part of us that is stuck and lost and basically abandoned by us. We re-find it and bring it alive, and solutions follow. Yeah.
I've got something to share actually with you. And this is something that's really twigged today. I was speaking to Pat, he's written a book on shadow as well. It's like he's talking about this idea, this disowned part of the self. And he was saying it like it comes from either like your family, your community, or social. And in my family, it was not acceptable to rest. It's just like, and I'd never even seen this about my shadow before. And like, actually, one of the biggest things that led me to shadow work was I was just on all the time, anxious drive to keep working, workaholic, and I was so tight and wound up. And that's what actually made me take a step into doing deeper work. And I never saw that as my shadow until today. I think it's today I really realized this is part. Do you know what's happened this year since like we worked together? I've just become way more chilled out. Like I've taken time off. I've had more space. And here's something that we bought a couch, and it sounds really inconsequential, but I've never had a comfy couch. And a couch, a sofa, a settee. I don't know what you American folk call it. Do you call it a couch?
Couch.
A couch.
Yeah.
A sofa. Yeah, sofa. So we bought a huge sofa, really comfy. I have spent so much time on this sofa. I've never spent so much time on the sofa. I've never been as successful as I am in a month. And I've just had this more and more is listening to that voice, that like deep, voice within my consciousness with saying recovery, like work on your recovery, take strategic breaks, for long time off, work less. And it's a lot of the work. And I think that a big part of my work with you and led me to this part where I actually listen to that voice now.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And it was huge. It's a huge change in me personally. And like I said before, I've only just realized that, as I was saying, I've never been as successful, never rested so much, and I've never listened to that voice. And you say, hey, just, Ben, instead of going and training and running, go to the sauna, just chill. And I've listened, and the difference in me is huge.
I mean, just to make sure that it's crystal clear to anybody who's listening in, you, it sounds like, have a shadow who fears that if he's not busy and working all the time, I'm going to guess proving and earning his worth through action and productivity, he's going to be a failure. And I don't even know what else that shadow fears. Maybe unloved, maybe not belong. But you discovered, it sounds like, a shadow part of you that carried that belief based on whatever messaging, whatever you picked up on in early childhood. And again, it gets created in so many different ways for people. You found the shadow and you've been doing shadow work for a while. So now you know that when you listen to that part of you, instead of, trying to repress it or control it, and you trust it and have faith in it, and you listen to it, like you said, and you take action. So it sounds like this shadow was saying to you, Benjamin, put down the Excel spreadsheet, stop, get on the couch. And it's a huge leap of faith to listen to that part of ourselves, which again, I'm saying carries a lot of intelligence.
Yeah.
We've forgotten, but the ego doesn't think it's intelligent and doesn't think it's going to work out. The ego just wants to run its little productivity program because that creates safety and security and it's predictable and it's, and so we just do it. But when you listened to that part, and this is something I bear witness to, I get a front row seat to a lot of people's lives. It's why I have so much confidence in this process of finding the shadow, listening, and then applying. As people grow their comfort, their tolerance, their faith in their shadow and take action, so much more is possible. than
Mm.
the program we're running, our belief system, right? It's like so much more is possible. So one of the things that apparently was possible for you is you could do a lot less, you could spend a lot more time on the couch and be more successful. That's what I would say. I'm like, my little kind of pithy statement about it is, if you will allow it, your shadow will orchestrate all kinds of possibilities and pathways that you can't access without it, with your ego alone. And so, but it's always a big risk. It feels to the ego like a big risk. I mean, I probably shared with you, getting my office space several years ago was my shadow. She
Yeah.
wanted me to take myself more seriously. And it was like my ego, if it had been up to me alone, if I was just operating, with ego consciousness, driving the vehicle of decision making with my ego alone, I would not have gotten that office. It didn't make a lot of rational sense financially. It was a big risk, in Santa Monica, California. But she was like, no, this is the next step. I promise. And I had done enough risk taking with her to that point to know that my life expands, not contracts, if I will just listen. So I had a process. I tried to negotiate with her. I mean, this is how practical the work actually is. I said to my shadow at that point, how about we get like office in somebody else's space, or, sublet, or, whatever. I tried to come up, and she was like, I want my own office.
Yes.
I want sunlight. And it has been one of the most fruit-bearing decisions
Wow.
I've ever made. So that's, just to drive home kind of the practicality of what we're talking about. We're talking about literally sharing your consciousness with a part of you that is as intelligent, and I would say more intelligent in many ways. It has the vision. It's the vision
Yeah.
part of the self.
I think one of the ways that you actually taught me, and this has always stuck with me, like, because sometimes you have to sell the work. You have to sell when someone's like, they need to do some deep work, or they're trying to work out their way through going and doing some personal work. And you talk about shadow work, and even if they've never heard of it, the best expression I think that you've ever kind of taught me was it's latent potential.
Mm.
And I really like that, because it's like all of the effort that you and I probably both see that people use holding themselves below the surface and holding themselves not being seen. When that's let go, because you accept yourself and express yourself fully, you can move forward faster, easier. And that's always just stuck with me. I was like, okay, well, because for me, when I first started doing this work, it was abstract and it was wonky, and you described it as wonky, messy, and weird. And I was like, I was left brain, linear, logical, rational, Mr. Excel spreadsheet, and kind of like systems and process. So it took me a long time to get going, and I found it really difficult. But I just knew I needed to do it, and that's what really has helped me. Is like, as I've done more of this work, I have accepted myself way more. It's like I'm so easy in my own skin, and I think that's when I see a lot of, especially leaders who are trying to hold up this mask, have this personal, like it's like this persona, this professional guise which a lot of people wear, or a certain way. It's tiring. It's exhausting. From what you shared all those years ago, is that I've just dropped that. I'm quite easy. Do you notice that with the people that you work with? Because obviously you work with some highly credible people in the limelight. Is that a lot of what's going on when they move into those positions?
Yes. I mean, I think that we develop a lot of defense mechanism, self-protection, coping to survive. And sadly, it kind of creates a block between us and the world. We develop all of these strategies to secure love and attention.
Wow.
Because we learn we have to do these things, again, like be productive, or be skinny, or be, perfect, or be, quiet or loud, or whatever you learned. Everybody learns something, and we just adapt. But the saddest part of that adaptation is that we're actually withholding the most true and real part of ourselves. And that's what feels best to express. It's also what happens to be most magnetic. People have like an invisible radar for authenticity. And it's, and they feel it, they resonate with it. I always love this statistic I learned a million years ago about, in communication, only 7% of what's happening is about the words that are being spoken, and 93% is about something else that's going on. So we get so hung up on, being perfect in X, Y, and Z way, but we're not actually giving the best of ourselves. We're protecting ourselves. We're withholding. And when we, in shadow work, you have to be internally safe. You have to feel safe and trust yourself internally to be able to be all of yourself in the world. And if you're hiding parts that you're afraid the world is going to judge because, again, your mother or your community, judged them or told you, don't be that, you're doing all of this hedging, and you're holding back and you're a little bit withdrawn, and the world can't see you or respond to you. All it wants, it's basically, I like to say, and I want to make it clear, because the shadow is the darkest part of yourself. It carries all the stuff, again, that we want to, we don't want to admit, because admitting it, we have to feel some feelings again related to whatever it was that we stuffed down. But once you do, and you love that part of you, you practice, you learn how to love and accept. And there's a way to do that. You've done this work every day, showing up and including kind of, accepting and loving and almost like reintegrating the, abandoned part of yourself. When you do that, this security is created. It's like an internal secure attachment. And then you can risk being your real self in the world. And again, the punchline is that's very magnetic. That's all of your lights. And the other punchline is that even though it's the darkest part of yourself, it's that unrealized potential. When you love and attend to it, when you do, like you said, we go to the outside world to compensate for our shadow, for how badly our shadow makes us feel when it's unknown to us. And so we just become addicts of trying to fill the hole that our shadow creates inside of us when it is unconscious, when it is unknown to us. We need people, places, and things. We use people, places, and things to compensate for that feeling of badness. If we can stop fixating on the outside world and turn towards the shadow and accept it, get curious about it, and work with it, we become actually bearers of light. Through that darkness comes this light, this latent potential and energy and courage and stamina to do the things we need to do to feel good in life, show up fully. That's what feels good. When we get to our deathbed, like the number 1 or 2 regret is people wish they had lived a life truer to themselves. Shadow work, in my experience, gives you a way to be brave enough to be your realest, truest self, which again, not only feels best, it works best. It creates love, connection, opportunity, flow.
Oh my gosh, so much there. So actually, I remember, like, this is almost like a therapy session in some ways. I look at like probably like 33, 34 when I started doing work with AMP, and when we met you and you did the tools and the shadow work with us. I looked back over my past and I had so much shame, so much regret, so much of the stuff that I like, so many of the things and ways I'd been in the past. I had so much heaviness over, like, just not like loads, but it was like slowing me down. I've a look back now, I don't have that. It's gone. It's like I've really accepted that, and I've really given that acceptance and forgiveness, and there's been so much in my life. So now when I'm creating, I'm just so much lighter, brighter, and faster, and that's I think what's been the biggest shift for me personally. I'm just going to ask a personal question, if that's okay, Kristan. What's been the biggest change for you? Like, what did it do for you? Like,
oh God, I mean, me too. I carried, based on my early experience, so much shame, so much fear. I was afraid most of my childhood. And so without really understanding it, again, like all of us just run a little survival program, and mine was just perfectionism. I'm going to like figure out, how do I be loved? How do I secure belonging and, connection? And so I just tried to learn a way to do that, and lost in who I was, truly, authentically, and became that, survival self, performative self, false self, and so I had carried so much of that. By the way, I had done lots of therapy, because I trained as a therapist. You do a lot of a lot of therapy, so I had told my story, I knew my story inside and out. But when I started encountering my story as my shadow, which, by the way, this is totally a side note, but is really what, psychedelics are so popular right now. And it's very similar to what shadow work does, but without needing to take any kind of mind-altering substance. It's the same thing. When you encounter, it's an encounter, though. That's the difference, is my point, is that when we do shadow work, we close our eyes. I close my eyes all the time to shut out the material world, shut down the ego, its default mode, survival program that is running all the time. And you go into the unconscious. Anyway, when you have this encounter with a part of yourself that is lost to you. And when I started doing that practice, as opposed to just telling the story and repeating the story, it didn't matter. I worked with that. Didn't help me. It helped me a little. But what really helped was working with the part of me that carried that story, carried those fears. First of all, loving her and attending to her every day, even when I didn't feel like anything was happening or working. That's what I was taught. Do it anyway. You don't have to believe. Just do it. That's a real part. It's a real abandoned part, and it's alone in the dungeon inside of us when we're not paying attention to it. So just the act of remembering it and trying to believe it. You're not going to believe this in the beginning. It's so contrary to the way we're kind of programmed in the modern world. It's very,
I can attest to that,
yeah, it's wonky and it's weird, but it works if you work it. So you work with this part. First, you love it and you practice this, I call it suspension of disbelief. Anyway, I'm gone way off your question. As I did that, and then she started talking to me, which is a phase. You have to earn the trust of this part of yourself by showing up, having faith, being like, I don't get it. I always use this one story. I'm writing a book about this, and I tell this story in a little bit in the first chapter because it's such a good example of a criminal prosecutor who, to me, is like the ultimate example of a very left brain dominant, practical, rational. The law is reason to its best expression. This guy, I'm like, okay, so we're going to bring this part of you alive, and you're going to, talk to this invisible kid inside of you in his case. And it was just like, oh my God, lady.
That's what I was like. That's what I was exactly. I was like, okay, I'm just going to push the big old believe button here.
Yes. And if it hadn't been, he was sent to me through his mentor, who's like a billionaire or something, some guy he has so much confidence in, and told him, you go do what she says. And I, at that point, also knew, because there's always a little bit of me, I'm like, I don't know. Because the first thing that happened when he finally, to his credit, he tried. He was sincere in his efforts. He still gives me a lot of shit, because this is such a funny, weird way to operate, but he does it. This person. So the first thing his shadow ever wanted, he closes his eyes and he's like, okay, well, we go into some exercise, and he sees an amusement park from his childhood. And I was like, and then it shifts into an image of a Ferris wheel at the Santa Monica Pier, close to where both of us live. And I was like, what do you make of that? He's like, I think I should go ride the Ferris wheel. And he's like, but I don't know if that was my shadow. And I was like, well, would you ever have had the idea of going and riding the Ferris wheel? And he said no. And I said, well, that's your shadow then. Let's assume that's your shadow. And he went and he rode the Ferris wheel. He left his law practice early on a Friday afternoon, went to the Santa Monica Pier, rode the Ferris wheel for this supposed imaginary being who I kept saying has the keys to your future. And by the way, I buried the lead, but the reason he came to me is that he was miserable practicing criminal law. And he was 55 though. So what do you do? His whole life is invested. Guess what this guy did? He went back with his shadow. He ends up going back to law school. He believed he was too fat, lazy, and dumb to be a tax lawyer. That was his internal belief. He didn't know that. But this shadow really believed that shadow believed all he deserved was criminal law, which was basically
Wow.
a reenactment of his early childhood environment. That's why he was miserable. Some people, being a criminal prosecutor, would be like the zenith, the dream come true.
Yeah. Yeah. I was
Him,
gonna
it was
say.
his childhood all over again. And so with his shadow, he ended up taking a huge risk on himself. And again, it didn't happen immediately. First, it was the Ferris wheel, then it was a little bit more risk, then it was a little bit more risk, but he brought this part alive. And now he's like in this incredible stage, like so much has fallen into his lap. He found a client of his became like is handing him his tax business. It's kind of crazy. And I don't want to get too over the top. And you asked me what it's done for me. It has made me, I love the way you said it, because that's actually my experience. I am able to risk my light. I am lighter, and I am in joy, and I am in flow. And that shows up in my love relationships with my children and my partner. And it shows up in my work. I have confidence to take risk on myself, which means I participate. I was a hider. I always hid. I like being behind the scenes, and I like staying underground and, behind. And that's not really what my shadow wants. It's hard for me still,
Yeah,
I'll
because
be honest.
even like you see with the like, so when I listen to just so you know, I'll probably put it in the comments for the podcast. I'll put a link to all the audios that you and Barry have done. By the way, these are the best psychoeducation you can possibly get your hands on. Like, they are so good. I've listened to them hundreds of times, literally hundreds of times. It's been running, and what's really interesting is like you can hear that like when you and Barry as a team is such a good synergy, and these are like the most well-known psychotherapists in the whole of pretty much the world now because of the Netflix documentary and stuff like that. And it's like you're really taking a forefront in the tools work now. It's like, which is really great to see. So for someone who wanted to be behind the scenes, that must be quite a big shift, right?
Totally. I mean, and again, just to drive home the real timeness of this, just because you know something doesn't mean that you're like inoculated from being human, right? So there's a 12-step slogan, and I think 12-step programs have a lot of wisdom intelligence in them. And so one of the slogans I like the best is you can't stay clean on yesterday's shower. So I know a lot about my shadow, and I have a lot of trust and confidence in the relationship, just like you do. You were willing to sit on the couch and trust. I had to cultivate that over time. But doesn't mean that when I'm up against some new risk edge, it's not completely scary all over again. So where I was going with that is it's still like, for me, social media, like I still have the getting out ahead. I have to work with my shadow every time I do a post. I have to use a tool to get out of my own way, because my natural default mode, here comes that idea, the way I would run the show, if left to my own devices, would be I would never put anything out there. It's too dangerous and scary back then. And that shadow drives my personality unless I'm loving it, and drives my decision making and my actions. But once I connect with her, I'm like, girl, I heard you. You want us to make a contribution to the world. You don't care what people think about us. You care about us expressing our full potential. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it with you. If I do these things with her, I become able to take risks and show up in my life with a degree of presence and life force that I do not show up with if I'm just an ego. And it makes everything better. I am in new heights of love and connection in all of my relationships because I am more whole. I mean, it's really basic. It's really basic. If you are a house divided because half of you or 70% of you or 20% of you lives in your unconscious and your shadow and is unknown to you, then you're only like 80% here. How can you expect the world to respond to you and see you and flow to you if you are only whatever 50% present. So the more you work with this part, again, it's like everything opens up, and you have the courage to take risks that you won't be able to take if you're just in your primitive set of fears that your ego will keep running and running and running and running as a program automatically.
Yeah. The way I like I've bargained with myself is like, when you look at these guys and gals who've invested in Bitcoin 10 years ago, they bought some Bitcoin, and now it's like, they're cashing in. And it's like the way I've kind of sold myself this idea of shadow work and doing this work, and it's been unsure and all these different things I've had to kind of get my head around, or not get my head around, literally my soul around, is that progressively it's become more of a guide, and it's helped me more and more. And even in just the short time of over the last, say, 3 to 4 years, it's been huge. And what's that going to amount to as I keep investing in that relationship? So it's like, that's kind of like how I'm selling myself the idea of doing the work. There's something you said there that's like, this was probably one of the most pivotal things that you said to me. And I think you might have even got so excited you were like almost shouting it. It's like the win is the risk. And like, it's kind of this, like, we know you hear from clients all the time, I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. And it's like, they're so hung up on the outcome. And you said to me once, and I think it was about age speaking deal I was doing, and it was about risk, and I can't remember what exactly, but it was, then the win is taking the risk, and whatever happens afterwards, if any good comes of it, giving it over to the shadow, like you and your shadow, risking it. That's as soon as you get to that point and you've taken the step, you've done the thing, that's the win. Like that for me it was pivotal. I was like, just take the risk, Ben. Like, as soon as, it doesn't matter what happens afterwards, it's like, take the risk. If it's negative, neutral, good, whatever, just take the risk, and that's the win. And that for me helped me create so much momentum. So if you could share a bit on that, that'd be really amazing.
Absolutely. One way that I talk about that kind of more recently is that it's like the privilege of the untraumatized is to care deeply, to try, to risk, to fail, to get up and do it all over again. Right? So you lose that when you carry a lot of, and again, I made a big point at the beginning about like trauma doesn't matter, but like when you, again, like all of us are traumatized to varying degrees. And when you're running your fear-based ego program, which is what we automatically run, you don't lose the willingness and the ability to just care deeply, try, risk, fail, rinse, repeat. That's what life calls for. Life calls for us being willing to do that. And so, if we can do that, that is the win, 100%. Because truly, life is a numbers game. If you do that enough, you win. You do win. But the other thing is, I want to make this a separate point, is that's what feels good. That's what feels good. We have credibility with ourselves. It doesn't feel good to hide, to go back to me. Like, you're lying to yourself. You can pretend you're okay. But that's what depression is. That's what anxiety is. You don't have credibility with yourself because you're not stepping up to the plate of your life. What feels good is to participate in your life. But again, if you can't take any of those risks, because you're so divided internally, then, which is what you won't be able to take risks, and it feels really bad. And so, we have tools that help you learn this, right? So there's a tool that helps you practice, kind of detaching from results and placing the emphasis. The metric of success is the fact, dear shadow, you practice this in the tool. So long as we stay connected during this risk, I have to do this podcast with Ben, I'm scared. Let me hold you, shadow. Let me commit, we're going to go all in together. And so long as we stay connected before, during, and after the podcast, I promise as the ego to consider it a victory, no matter what happens. The win is that we are moving forward together in life. And that's what feels good. There's one other thing I just wanted to say that I think is really important that hasn't been said yet, which is that I do want it to be really clear. There's also a positive self-reinforcing part to this work. So what happens is that when you systematically take these risks with your shadow, and you live through it, 99% of the time, our worst fears don't happen. There's another tool where you track this, right? That science of reality tool. So you start, once you have a relationship with your shadow, it liberates you to take these risks, and then you can start tracking. Okay, I went on the podcast. What were all my worst fears? You track it. What was the risk? What were all the fears? I would sound stupid. I wouldn't make sense. I would go on too long. I wouldn't make Benjamin happy. Like, I just go crazy with all of my fears. I'd disappoint him. And then I track in the third column what actually happened. And the point is, 99 times out of 100, all the things we feared don't happen. And this becomes self-reinforcing. The more you take these risks that your shadow wants you to take, and you do them with your shadow, and not only do things not go horribly wrong, you expand, things get better. You're like, okay, I'm a believer for life. Like, I will run this program forever. It feels better, and my life expands.
Oh my God, yeah, because even recently, so I had a couple of business decisions to make, and like one of them was like a huge investment in ads, or do I spend the same amount on a coach, or do I spend this like, and it was like, and they all feel risky, and I was sitting on it. I was like, okay, and I was stuck, and I honestly was like, even though I was having a great month financially, there was actually a big part of me that was really stuck. So it was interesting, because normally I always tell myself, if I'm in this much momentum in one area, of course I'll be able to move forwards in another. But I was literally couldn't make a decision, and I didn't know why. And I realized it was just about that risk. I was like, I'm telling myself that if I make a decision on one of these three things, it's going to be, the risk is too big. I might, there's going to be a bad thing that happens at the other end of making that decision. And anyway, as soon as I realized that, made a decision, moved forward into action. It was definitely like a reversal of desire moment. I was like, okay, I love making decisions. Decisions set me free. Bring it on. And I made a decision. I texted the person. And it was like, I made a decision. And I think that was kind of like, I'd missed that. Sometimes we live so comfortably, we miss that opportunity to really like. And I think those micro moments where you get to make those kind of decisions are pivotal.
Yes. Action is the medicine. The people who make the most amount of decisions and are in the most amount of action kind of win, in that resultsy way. I mean, they win internally because they feel better. But again, math adds up. Like, you throw enough spaghetti at the wall, something's going to stick. But that
was gold.
What's that?
That was gold. What you just said then.
Okay, awesome. And again, when I want to drive home, the reason you and I are talking so much about the shadow is like, you can know that. You can know, oh, let me just get into action. Let me set my goals for 2025. But there's a part of us that holds us back, sabotages us, and makes it impossible to take the risks unless we work with it. So that's what shadow work gives you a way to do. How do I find the part of me that is making it impossible for me to get into action, that's paralyzing me? And let me just say this. If you are curious, as soon as the ego is curious, if you want to know what that part is, it is there. Like, we've forgotten. This is a lost art in modern reality, in modern times. If you want to know, I guarantee, I can tell you this authoritatively, and I'm not in the business of making promises, but I have enough time and experience working with every variety of person, hour after hour after hour. This is reliably true. I mean, by the way, Benjamin, I keep thinking this. I'm like, I kind of feel like we got to provide an exercise. I feel guilty being this excited.
I'm
talking about, but not giving people at least a little way to do it themselves. I don't want to direct the conversation, but I'm just telling you that's coming up. My shadow feels
go for it. Yeah. Hey, I'm an active participant. If you want me to be if you want to do the work and ask me to be
we can end on that. We can end on it. But I feel like we have to give people just a taste of, because I want to deliver on what I just said. If you're interested, if you're curious, if you want it, I guarantee this part of you wants to be found by you. It's just waiting. It can't come alive without attention. That's what the ego controls. Without willingly turning inside of yourself, closing your eyes and getting curious. Why I'm having all these big feelings about, not being able to make a decision, or, my child going off to college, or, my job that I hate. It doesn't matter what it is. If you slow down, close your eyes, and get curious, feel those feelings, you can find the shadow who is if the feelings are big in the here and now, right? When we're triggered, it means primitive material is present. So if it's hysteric, it's historic. That's what they say in a 12-step program. But it's like, so if I'm triggered, it means there's a shadow who needs my attention. Every time it's reliable. And I just want to give people a way to know how to start working with it.
Yeah, I think that'd be amazing. I like what you said about being triggered then, because I don't get triggered as much anymore. Like that's something what it's done for me. And I think that if you're a leader, like my audience is leaders, people who manage teams, who have staff, if you live in a world where you're constantly having disproportionate reactions to people, things, behaviors, that's your shadow. Like that, I can conclusively say that. And I realized that was the thing that changed for me in doing the work. I was walking around literally like a triggered, stiff-jawed, clenched person. And I think that's what changed for me the most. In doing shadow work. Like, so big left field, because I know we're going to come around to it. There's something that I heard I think it's you or Barry said, and it is because my audience, if they've listened to the podcast for more than 10 minutes, they know I talk about part X, and part X being the self-sabotaging inner enemy that is there to steal your attention and weaponize it against you so that you don't move forwards. And one of the things that you said was really interesting, and I've seen, once I heard it, I can't remember which audio it was, or you just said it to me personally, but it was about part X weaponizing your ability to sabotage relationships. Like, it's literally like cannibalizing good relationships. I think that's what I heard. And I realized that so many people do this. They cannibalize, and like I've done it. I think I've heard Barry explaining this before, is where you have a narrative in your head about somebody and you can't let it go. And it's normally the closest people to you. And I realized that was a really bad habit for me, is that I would have really good friendships and they could do one thing, and then I would get a really like kind of bad narrative going on, and it wouldn't break the relationship down. It's just in the moment, it would disconnect me from them. Is this making sense, Kristan? Because it's something that I've noticed in my own psyche over the last year. And since I noticed it's way better, I catch myself doing it way, way, way faster.
Yes.
Could you share on that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, part X, I want to make sure people are hearing it. It's part and then the letter X. So now you're introducing a new figure who lives inside of us. Part X is different than the shadow, but they're very related to each other. I like to think of them as two sides of the same coin. So part X, just like the shadow, is universal. Everybody has this part of their psychology. And again, to me, what is so brilliant about tools work and the work of Phil Stutz is that it gives us a way to just simply understand these figures and work with them. So we're not like caught up in analysis. It's very applicable. So everybody has the part of them that is the inner bully, enemy, saboteur, critic, right? We've heard a lot about the inner critic. That's what we're talking about when we talk about part X. And what part X does, especially when you don't know your shadow, it's taking your shadow's fears and it weaponizes them against you.
Right.
So let me make it more concrete. If I grew
Kristan,
up...
Can I just interrupt you there? So one of my biggest part X experiences was impulses. I would be sat down to do creative work and I'd get an impulse. So what you just said there is it takes your shadow's biggest fears and weaponizes them. So is that why I had so many impulses? Because my shadow's fear was slowing down.
I was just going to say that sounds very, without doing the work on it, with you. Yes, it sounds like that was almost like a tick. It was like a
Yeah,
behavioral habit of like, I don't know how to be still, which was coming from a fear that your shadow had, that if you slowed down, you'd be lost. You wouldn't be able to pay for groceries, right? That was
yeah,
like
yeah,
existential, primitive fear that you carried, by the way, because for some good reason. The shadow
yeah.
gets created based on real stuff that's happening. The problem is that you will keep running. You will base your whole life today on the assumptions and the beliefs of a part of you that lives in the past. So
Wow.
maybe you couldn't pay the bills. Let me just make some quick math here. Like, let's
Wow.
say, I just want to be clear. The shadow gets created for real reasons. Maybe, your parents couldn't pay an electricity bill once and you went to school and you weren't able to brush your hair and somebody made fun of you. And that created a shadow who's like, I will never, ever let that happen again. I will do everything to have money and be able to provide. And that, believe it or not, this is really how human psychology works.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
creates a set of habits of like, if I slow down, I'll be back in 5th grade with messy hair and everybody going, that
yeah,
loser. And so it runs the show from the subconscious, from the unconscious, same thing, subconscious, unconscious. And our part X takes the fear. If we don't work with it and we don't know it, sadly, like conventional psychology calls it the negativity bias, we have a part of us that is collecting evidence all the time that our worst fears are true and
wow.
convincing us
Yeah,
to never take the risks, right? So it does it in very creative ways. It creates impulses. It creates, overworking. It creates whatever it creates. One thing you also said in an example you gave is this is a different shadow in you, I would assume. But when a friend makes a mistake, your part X convinces you that they're not trustworthy, probably based on an experience you had very young that like people can hurt you and let you down. And so all our part X is doing is just trying to like, oh, there it is. So don't risk your heart. Again, conventional psychology would say it's trying to keep us safe, which is in a way true. It wants us to run the primitive program that kept us safe back then, but it's irrelevant today. And we live in a little prison of our own making when so much else, obviously we know that just because a friend made one mistake, but all of the evidence is that they're wonderful, like that's not rational. But when it's happening inside of us, it doesn't matter whether it's rational. The force of the feelings and the emotion, the stuff that takes us over, the shadows, fears, part X saying, don't trust, don't stop working. It is so compelling, it drives us.
That's a really big light bulb moment for me. Actually, is like what you said there. Is that Part X's job is to make us believe that our fears are real. It's like gather, and I've never really. That's such a simple way to put it, and I'm like, actually, yeah, cause that's what it is. It's like, oh yeah, told you so. Look, it's just.
Don't risk your heart again, right? So that's the question you had asked is part X wants to come between us and our shadow. That's the first relationship it wants to disrupt and sabotage, because to part X, if we start working with our shadow, what's going to happen? We're going to start taking risks. We're going to reignite the part of us that has an appetite to grow and to expand. And guess what that means? We're going to have to take risk and we're going to put ourselves in uncertain situations. Part X does not want that to happen. So it takes all that, primitive stuff and it wants to come between us and our shadow. So it hijacks our attention. It hijacks us. It uses so many different strategies. But then the other way, it doesn't want us to risk in our real relationships with people in the present tense. So it's anti-relationship. It doesn't want us to connect with our shadow, and it doesn't want us to engage in relationship, because what are relationships?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just seeing so much clarity from that as well. It's like I can see in my own life where I think going back to like, what has all this work done for me? I can go way deeper in relationships.
And
Yeah.
the most important thing is, I feel like we're talking so theoretically about everything, but the beauty of the tools is that you don't really have to understand any of this. What our work, what tools work teaches you to do is to start to identify, how is your part X working you? Kristan, if you post on Instagram, you are going to say something dumb and you're going to be canceled. I mean, that's literally what my part X, that's the pitch. I mean, it says a lot of other things, like, I don't know if you can see, like, this hair isn't working and like, whatever, like, it fills me with a lot of incessant talk, chatter that robs my focus and makes it impossible for me to do the very simple thing of like telling the truth with my whole heart, right?
Right.
And it convinces me to do that, and it makes it impossible so that I, withhold and withdraw. Oh, my point is, sorry, I lost the plot. So the point is, as soon as you just need to start identifying, how is your part X? What is it telling you? People are untrustworthy. Horrible things happen. You're too fat. It's got something and that it's telling you all the time. And in our work, you start fighting it. You start standing up to it.
Mine's don't show off. I don't know where that came from, but because I don't think it was my mum. I don't think it was like, it was like, don't show off. I think that was definitely one from school. Like, don't be a show off. Don't show off.
Well, that's a thing in your culture. I didn't know it until I worked with Brits and Aussies, but tall poppy syndrome.
Tall poppy syndrome.
We don't have that. That's not a thing.
Yeah. And I definitely in a small North Wales town, it's like, but, even though I was showing up and I was showing off to a degree, I believe there was way more to it. There was I had so many more gears. I was in gear 5 where I realized I probably could have hooked gear 10. And so that was a big one for me. I love talking about Part X. I could literally do, I've done so much work on understanding Part X because so many people resonate. Like, honestly, I just think the psychoeducation of telling people about all of the weapons of Part X and being able to label it. I really like that style of education, which is like, sometimes I've got so much shift personally just from listening to you and like listening to the stuff that you and Barry have done or listening to the books, because I don't need to do any therapy. I just listen. I'm like, and I can spot it so much quicker. And I think guys like that kind of therapy as well. They can just listen, they learn, and they start spotting it. And I've given guys kind of just a basic of what Part X is. They've gone away. They've learned. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I can spot that now. The energy, the hopelessness, the lack of the victim narrative. So that's been a really big help for me and so many leaders. I know at the end of the session you said you wanted to do some work, so I think now be a great time to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, just to close that point about Part X, you don't have to understand it. You don't have to believe in it. If you start identifying your Part X and fighting it, and there's a great tool called Cosmic Rage that helps you have a way to fight Part X. You mount a little bit of resistance. The tool is on thetoolsbook.com. It's for free. You can just go read up about the tool. But what you will find is more flow follows. So I just want to make that clear. Just try it. Just try and see what happens. Your life will feel better and more flow will follow for sure. So that's when it comes to Part X. And, again, kind of like underneath Part X, your Part X is only so virulent and powerful because you have a shadow, a lost, abandoned part of you that lives inside of you who believes that they aren't good enough, can't slow down, shouldn't show off or show themselves, should hide. There's a part of you that believes that, fears that you are, again, X, Y, and Z. And it's different for all of us, but it's, again, every human carries this part of us. So Part X is very powerful to the extent, especially more powerful if we don't know our shadow. So again, they go hand in hand. The more you find and love your shadow, it's like inoculating yourself to Part X. Your Part X isn't as powerful because you love what does it have to weaponize against you? Whoa. You're already like, hey, it's okay. I know I'm afraid that if I, put myself on Instagram or show off or stop working hard, maybe everything will go to pot, and I've made a decision to do it anyway. And I love myself no matter what. And you're practicing tools. What's your part X going to use against you? So the more you work with your shadow, the less power part X has over you. And the more you fight part X, the more safe your shadow feels. So again, they really relate to each other. But let's take it kind of out of theory and do something, give people a way to start to identify their shadow. And let me just be clear, the shadow is shape-shifting and changes over time. So you've probably picked up on the fact in our conversation that you continue to work with the shadow. It's kind of like you find a shadow, you work with it, and you mend the rift between you and it. And it doesn't mean that you won't need to work with that shadow again, but most likely your life will present new challenges and opportunities and growth experiences, and you'll get the opportunity to discover some other shadow that lives inside of you. So it's not one and done. It's an ongoing process for being human and being able to, again, keep expanding, taking risk, and growing. And so whatever you find today, that's all my way of saying, trust it, go with it, trust that it's what wants attention today. And there are probably other shadows that are going to want attention. The more you tune in and try this stuff, the more not only you will find lost parts of yourself that hold the keys to lost potential, but the more you'll have a real experience of it. So it really is an act of faith and, or a suspension of disbelief. Just try. And if you don't get something, kind of breakthrough today, try again tomorrow. It's there, it wants to be found, and it will continue to morph and shift over the course of your life. So should we do that?
Yeah, I'm game. Let's go.
So if you're, if you're listening into the podcast and you're in a place where you can close your eyes, I'm going to close my eyes because it helps me tune out the material world. And so, if you're driving, then don't close your eyes, obviously, or pull to the side of the road or listen later, tune into this part later. But for this part, I'm going to need you to close your eyes. And I'm just going to make that a step in and of itself. Closing our eyes is an active decision to put down the material world. So just for the next couple of minutes, everything out there, your identity, your obligations, your responsibilities are null and void. Let's make that decision. Closing our eyes helps us tune out of the outside world and tune into the interior world, which is just as real, but more mysterious to the ego, less tangible, and it's invisible, but it is as real and it is playing a real part in your day-to-day life. So this is an act of turning inside and bringing attention and curiosity and non-judgment to this interior space. And I'm saying all of this because what I'm asking you to do is just you're getting on a ride. When you go into this interior space, the unconscious or the right brain, which is where the unconscious is in the right brain, all the rules of reality are a little different. It's a lot more like a dream state. So you have to trust. For the ego, it requires trust, non-judgment, and just kind of following. The unconscious speaks in metaphor. It's visual, it's image-based. So I want to encourage you and invite you to just get on the ride and trust and follow. I have a tremendous amount of confidence from doing this work with so many different kinds of people that the unconscious does not make mistakes. So whatever it is that comes up, we may not get it. Doesn't always make sense to the ego, but it's not an accident. Okay, so let's bring that spirit into the next part of this tool. And now what I want to invite you to do, I'm going to give you 2 ways to practice this tool. There's kind of a generic way. That's the first way I'm going to lob up. You could go into, I want you to come up with a memory, a time when you felt one of the following feelings: shame, vulnerability, guilt, or exposure. Okay? And I'll come back to it, but that's one option. You could look for a memory of a time when you felt one of those feelings, or you could go to a situation that is triggering and activating you today. And it's anything. It could be anything, something that is bringing up big feelings in you. Again, it could be a relationship with a kid or a partner or a boss. It could be your obsession, your meanness to yourself and your body every time you look in the mirror. It could be having to let go of something. You wanted a house, you wanted a job, you wanted to get into a certain school or a club and you didn't get it. So I don't care what the feelings are. I want you to, this is invitation number 2. Think of an experience you're encountering right now that is bringing up a lot of feeling. And so again, you can go to a past memory when you felt shame, guilt, vulnerability, exposure, or you can go to something that is in the present tense, a trigger, a present day trigger. And once you have something, I want you to, with imagination and focus, very powerful faculties, bring that memory or that experience alive. So if it's a memory, recreate the memory in your mind's eye. Go back to the humiliating thing. Go back to the experience and try to reenact it in your mind's eye. Bring it back alive. And if it's a present day trigger, go to the last time you had an encounter with that trigger and bring up the feelings as if they're happening right now. Now, this already is a very courageous thing to do, because more than anything, the ego wants to get the fuck out of Dodge. Pardon my French. We don't like feeling these things. We want to move on to the next moment and act like the bad one didn't happen. So this takes a lot of honesty and courage to go into these feelings and admit them and allow them. So good job. I mean, I really want you to know that you're being brave by doing this. And I want you, what you'll notice is you're in the experience, but you're also witnessing it. So that's what we can do when we're not actually in the experience. We can recreate it and we can observe it and become aware. So again, recreate the experience in your mind's eye. And now I just want you to get really curious. What are the feelings? What is that state like? If I'm angry, what is that like? What's going on inside of me? And again, I want you to kind of hover around it and see if you can collect information. Are there other feelings? Are there sensations? If you want to know and become aware of what embarrassment, shame, anger, sadness, whatever the feeling is, if you want to become aware of it, you'll start to become aware of almost like adjacent feelings and sensations. So let me slow down and let you bring all of that experience, whatever you decided to work with, bring it alive, and now connect with what that state was like inside of you when it was activated, when it was happening. Just take courage, feel the feelings, notice the sensations, notice even if there are thoughts. And now, once you feel connected to that state, I want you to imagine, this is a leap, that you can take all of those feelings, sensations, thoughts, and you can put them outside of you. You can push them out or you can step back from them. But I want you to see that state of whatever, fill in the blank. I want you to see it outside of yourself. And I want you to know and admit that there is a being who carries those feelings and sensations for you inside of you all the time. And your job is just get curious. Who is the being? So you're giving those feelings a face, form, figure, an identity of its own. And mostly you're asking, who are you? The embodiment of all of this. And just wait, ask. The one thing you control is asking sincerely, humbly, and wanting. Want to find this part who knows the depth of these feelings all the time and carries them for you when you are mostly unwilling and unwanting of them. And so if you need to, you can circle back. You can go back into the experience, reignite, bring the feelings alive, push them out, and again, give them a face and figure, a being. Maybe it looks something like you, maybe it's a young you, maybe it's a distorted you, a hunched over you, a turned away from, scared you. It might not look anything like you. Just see and hold the door of your attention and your curiosity open generously and willingly. I want to know you. I want to see you. That is your shadow. And whatever came into view is right. And the next step, and I will bring us out, but the next step real quickly is just letting it know, I see you. I'm interested in you. I don't want to ignore you any longer. And practice, try that. Try that right now. And notice if this being responds, how it responds when you say that. So say to your shadow, I see you. You're not alone. I'm interested in you. And I want to stop ignoring you. Just notice what happens. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Wow, that's good. I can share if you want me to.
Yeah, I would love it.
Yeah, mine was actually really, really recent. So like 2 days ago, I went to the nursery where my daughters go. I just was going to tell them I was late for picking them up today. I looked in and there was a little boy next to her and he lifted up her skirt and I could see through the glass. And these are the 2-year-olds. And I was like, at the time, I didn't even know what to do. And I was just like, I was literally, what's the word for it? Numb.
Mm.
And as soon as I walked out, I got really hot and really angry. And I just didn't know what to do because I was like, I've walked out now. I haven't made a scene. It was that part. It was an angry, aggressive, violent part of me that was, I was actually shameful because I didn't react and didn't go in and shout. And I was like, I just got super neutral and like numb, and I walked out. And then I rang the nursery and I said it wasn't appropriate, and they sorted it out. But that whole shadow was really clear. It's like really like, and maybe for a lot of men that might be the same case. Is like that's often a shadow a lot of people have. So yeah, that was interesting. Really clear.
Let me ask you a question. So what I hear is that, there's a great part of this equation, which is that you don't react blindly and unconsciously from this part of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a good thing, right? You didn't go and like scream at the 2-year-old. That wouldn't have been, helpful or appropriate. But what I really heard is that there's this part of you wants, like it was mad at you that you didn't take a bigger stand in a way, that you're so sober and appropriate and, self-regulating. And so the great news about having a conscious relationship with this part is that you don't have to let it drive you. Reaction, right? Stimulus reaction. That's what you didn't do. But it sounds to me like this shadow might also be telling you, Benjamin, I want you to be more something. So if he had value, if you've suppressed him because you think he's antisocial, you think that he's dangerous, you think he's an asshole, but perhaps he has something of value, and you could actually do this right now. Let's actually have you do this. I don't want you to think about the answer. I want you to ask him. So just bring this shadow that emerged into the foreground of your mind and ask him, you can even say to him, it's great that we know each other well enough now that you didn't take me over and I didn't scream at a 2-year-old, but that's great. Is there anything you want me to become aware of where I'm holding back, where you would like me to be taking more risk that would make me feel uncomfortable because it would make me feel maybe too aggressive or too assertive? Is there anything you want to point out to me that makes you feel like I'm, suppressing you or not trusting you?
Yeah, I'm just hearing hear it and stand up for yourself. Don't be a pushover. Like that's That's kind of, don't be so amicable. Is it amiable? Amiable?
No, well, I think both actually are words, but I
Yeah,
think that's interesting. Don't be so amicable.
yeah. I am quite amicable. It's just like easy going, and yeah, and like I think sometimes I get pissed at myself. I'm like, no, don't sit on the fence. Be pushy here,
Yeah.
and yeah, you know,
So that's just to finish this whole loop of this conversation. That now is something you don't have to do anything with it, but if you do, your life will change. I think of it reminds me of a director I worked with who came to me because he was like trapped in commercials and wanted to direct a feature film. And the whole crux of making that leap came down to a figure like this, an evil shadow. He was the nicest guy ever, so appropriate. It had worked. I mean, he's a very successful guy, but being able to get to the next level of self-expression and creativity required him to be more of an asshole. And it was so uncomfortable for him. So we found, and I tasked him with, and by the way, he just made his first movie. So like that figure worked for him. But so what I would task you with is asking him every day, show me an opportunity to be less amicable and a little bit more of an asshole. And you have to, I mean, you don't have to do anything, but if you should you accept your mission, you have to try it, because what you perceive as being an asshole is not being an asshole.
yeah, yeah.
It's more assertive. It might command more respect. It probably reads more confident, right? There's like all kinds of, so you don't have to even understand any of that. You have to be looking for opportunities. I don't know if asshole is the right word, although I feel like we've talked about this before.
Yeah, we have talked about this before.
Yeah, now I'm remembering that you still are not wagering your ass, but you need this shadow to help you have the courage in the moment, because you are still going to be too nice, too humble, too self-deprecating, too accommodating. So your only job, in my opinion, is to ask for an opportunity, work with him to kind of orchestrate, and then you help me see it when it happens, something that is tolerable. Now, you can't go to, a degree that you're of risk that you can't tolerate, the ego can't tolerate, you won't do it. But there will be micro opportunities to risk. I'm thinking of an example from my own life when I worked with my evil shadow, and it was literally on a customer service call. And it's like, I just remember, I was like, oh, here's one of those opportunities. I'm just going to be endlessly nice instead of asserting myself. Like, I don't have time to like make the person in customer service happy, but I want to treat every human being with like love and respect and dignity. And so I brought in that evil shadow and I said something. I don't remember what I said, but it was like kind of demanding. And it was like, not only was she not offended, it just got what I needed so much faster. So find small ways to test this hypothesis.
I love that. If you live in Dubai, they are super assertive in customer service. They're not nice. They are very direct. That's really funny. The women you speak to on the phone, they are very, very direct, and it's great. It's quite refreshing. It's like, okay, cool. You feel like you mean
some customer service calls, apparently, whatever you're putting off. Yeah.
I'm really glad people will get to see that. Like, honestly, like sometimes I think that, the work I've done with you and the work that is what is created for me is like your brilliance in the way that you just do that thing. I have so much envy of your ability to just like kind of just guide people through that. It's one of my North Stars. And honestly, like if you've done the exercise, if you haven't done the exercise, that exercise puts in place a series of changes in your life. That was one of the first exercises you did with us in Awaken Man. And I can look back and it's been a massive journey of self-discovery and tools and just really connecting with a part of myself that I've never thought would have so much value. So thank you, Kristan. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And if you did find a shadow figure, I just want to say, try to relate to it a little bit every day. Practice. It's very simple work. Just remember, hold, your shadow, hold a visual of it with you 2 times a day. That changes its reality. It doesn't get to exist unless you remember it and pay attention to it. One step further, you could ask it, what do you want? What do you need? How can I make you feel loved, seen, protected. If you ask, you'll get answers. If you ask it, you'll get answers. So that's how you work with your shadow, is you remember it, you bring it alive in your mind's eye. I share the first moment I wake up with my shadow. I made a commitment to myself just to create a habit because the natural default mode is going to be to forget. And so I wake up and I always think of her first. Hi, I have a check-in. Some days I feel it, some days I don't feel it. I do it anyway. So that's kind of part of the practice. Anyway, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'll signpost a load of stuff in the comments on this podcast or this YouTube video or however you're consuming it. So you can find Kristan's work. You can find the tools. When's the book out? Come on.
I know. Probably 2026.
And when eventually the book is out, I will be showcasing that. I'll be sharing that because I'm sure it'll be full of absolute gems. And thank you so much for sharing on the podcast today, Kristan.
Thanks so much for having me. Always so much fun to talk to you.